China's annual parliamentary session comes to a close tomorrow. The top legislature is expected to formally agree to a controversial national security law for Hong Kong. In keeping with tradition, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang will also answer questions from local and foreign media. Olivia Xiong reports.
A show of triumph for China in its handling of the pandemic, even as gatherings are curtailed elsewhere in the world. That was the expectation as Beijing moved to convene its annual parliamentary sessions after a 2-month delay.
Now, as you can see, it's still not quite business as usual. Delegates gathering in Beijing have been kept away from the public, and many events like media conferences and interviews have been organized via video link instead. This has meant that many journalists, like myself, have had to monitor this year's developments remotely through the computer screen.
As expected, the economic fallout took center stage during the week-long meetings. China's GDP shrank by 6.8% in the first quarter of this year, the first recorded contraction since the late 1970s.
找工作难找啊，就是复工的公司少吧，然后就招聘的人也少。
各个行业肯定受到冲击嘛，我们业务肯定会受到影响，对这个职业的安全性挺担心的。
Amid growing concerns over the economy, the Chinese government chose not to announce a GDP growth target for this year, but stressed that ensuring employment was a top priority, even as reports emerge about mass layoffs.
Because of the uncertainty caused by COVID-19, preserving social stability, a sense of safety is very, very important. And the most important means for doing that is making sure that people have jobs and jobs that they feel are safe.
This year's meetings have also been notable for the harsh language used to describe China-US ties, which have chilled dramatically since the US emerged as the new epicenter of the virus.
令人遗憾的是，除了新冠病毒的肆虐，还有一种政治病毒也正在美国扩散。这种政治病毒就是利用一切机会对中国进行攻击抹黑。
And he warned that both countries are being pushed to the brink of a new Cold War.
China now is saying that it's not ready to challenge the United States. This does not mean that China cannot have a larger leadership over the world affairs, especially over the affairs of the developing world.
But it was Hong Kong that threatened to overshadow the entire proceedings after Beijing announced the discussion of a new national security law for the city.
Over the past 10 months, I think the Beijing already realized that even without doing that, probably they still couldn't stop the protests, because you can see that the protests have been lasting for a very long time. And that was only triggered by the extradition bill.
When the Hong Kong government tried to pass similar legislation in 2003, about 500,000 people took to the streets to protest it, and it was eventually shelved. The new proposal too has resulted in fresh protests in Hong Kong. But after last year's long summer of discontent in the city, Beijing may have decided that now's the time to rein in Hong Kong before it gets out of hand. Olivia Xiong, CNA.
Well, let's get more perspective into the escalating tensions in Hong Kong, and we're speaking to political analyst Professor Joseph Cheng. Professor, has this planned security law, this national security law, has it effectively reignited that protest movement that had been subdued for a few months now?
Not exactly. I think the pro-democracy movement had been prepared to relaunch the protest activities in view of the improvement of the pandemic situation, and especially in the context of the of several conspicuous dates coming up, like June 4th, July the 1st, anniversaries of protests last year, and so on. But certainly, the national security law has provided additional and significant momentum for protest activities. Hong Kong people are terribly disappointed and frustrated by the imposition of this law from Beijing, and many people see this as the as the end of the one country, two systems model. However, one has to admit that massive arrests and prosecutions has probably dampened the momentum of organizing large-scale protest activities. They probably have become more scattered.
And Professor, looking at it from China's point of view, does this new law suggest that Beijing's patience with the protesters in Hong Kong is wearing thin? And what sort of response do you think we can expect if things do continue to escalate in the next few days?
Well, certainly this is the case. It has been announced actually by Chinese officials concerned that the decision to impose this law was made by the Central Committee of the party in its plenary session held last October last year. The Chinese authorities has been adopting this policy of no contact, no negotiations, and no concessions vis-a-vis the pro-democracy movement, and therefore a crackdown and suppression would be the logical outcome. I think even if the situation escalates, the existing policy will be maintained in the context of deteriorating domestic and international environments for the Chinese authorities. It is not expected that they will make any concessions. The crackdown will definitely continue, and we expect the law to be implemented probably within a period of 6 months or so.
Professor Cheng, speaking of escalation, the US is also now planning to retaliate against China over this issue. Could the protests in Hong Kong lead to perhaps maybe a new wave of US-China tensions?
Well, Sino-American relations have been deteriorating, and it is in this context that that the Hong Kong issue has become an agenda item in this confrontation. It has been announced that the Donald Trump administration will probably announce certain sanctions against China over the protest activities in Hong Kong. The Donald Trump administration probably realizes that simple criticisms and condemnations may not be adequate, but it will not probably completely withdraw the privileges granted to Hong Kong as a special administrative region. So it will be somewhere in between. It will probably include a blacklist against Chinese officials and Hong Kong officials involved in this crackdown, denying them entry into the United States and maybe even freezing their assets in the United States and so on. And it may involve perhaps the suspension of some of the privileges, some of the trade privileges granted to Hong Kong for a certain period of time.
Okay, mate. Thanks for your thoughts, Professor Cheng, a former political science professor at the City University of Hong Kong.